Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for the day. We pray that you'll bless our time together as we try to make sense of some of the challenging things that are going on in the world today and their relation to Bible prophecy. Bless our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today we're going to title this Challenging Times. The alternative title I thought of was, oh boy. But I decided that would be too easy. So I did do a midweek update this week. You can find that on our YouTube channel. I think that's the only place I posted it. It's and some people have volunteered, and I'm going to contact them about helping with posting in different places. So I will get back to you eventually. Somebody asked me, they said, well, so did you find that doing a midweek update made it less difficult for you to do your week, get everything in your weekly update on Sunday? And I'm like, no, it's not even close. Because I'm just doing two things each week that I'm trying to rush through to get through everything. So, challenging times. We talk about the convergence of events. It does. I mean, I've been using this almost for 10 years now. A disrupted world, and can we fix this? And it appears that we can't. As we get closer and closer to, I think, the time when things will really get accelerated. And remember, I did do a talk in Canada back in April. I think you can still find that on Last Days Bible Conference YouTube channel. I did a talk called Deplatforming Humanity. In that talk, I did a sort of a grid that I look at when I evaluate all of these things. I look at things that are sort of related to, of course, Israel and the church and apostasy and that type of thing. But in a broader terms, there's an acceleration of all these things that the prophets say. They're going to happen more quickly. There's going to be a convergence. They're going to be all happening at the same time. There's a logistics aspect that there have to be certain things that are in place for them to happen. There's to be a buildup. I use the example of this. So one of the theories is that Babylon, the Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18 is literal Babylon, and it will be rebuilt in Iraq at the site of the old Babylon. So this is one of the possibilities that I consider. I'm not saying that I agree with this, but I think it's one of the ones that's worthy of consideration. But if Babylon's going to become this great commercial center, you can go there now, and it's just a bunch of archaeological buildings and a half-destroyed palace of Saddam Hussein. There's nothing there. So if it's going to become this great commercial center, and you think of something like Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, that's been in process. And if you see that, it's a phenomenal city. I mean, they have tallest building on the planet. They have all these enormous skyscrapers. They have hotel that's 1,000 feet high, shaped like sort of a sail on the ocean. It's beautiful. And the architecture and all this, there's just some phenomenal things they've done. But they've been at it for 40 years. You can go back, you can look at Dubai 1981 and see that there was just a couple buildings there, skyscrapers. I wouldn't even call them, you wouldn't even notice them now in the skyline if they're still there. So it took 40 years. So if Babylon is indeed going to be restored, then it's going to take a while. Now, I know the construction, I know that the Chinese have supposedly built a 57-story skyscraper in like 3 days or something like that, or a month. Now, do you want to go in that building, by the way? So just understand that all these things take time. So there's acceleration, convergent, logistics, and then understanding. I talked about that from Daniel chapter 12, that in the end there will be people of wisdom, people that will understand. They will be called wise people, and they will instruct the many. So that is something that you're going to see people that are going to understand more about what's going on than other people. So we try to be that kind of church that has those kind of people that see these things happening and can try to piece them together. So we're going to try to piece a few things together today, and this is going to be rock and roll for the next, whatever. No guarantees. So here's, and I'm not going to talk about that Charlie Vector 019er thing that much. There are a couple related things. Well, you'll understand about why I'm not talking about it when we're putting something up on YouTube. It's unbelievable what's going on. The censorship and that type of thing. It's crazy. And now they're even coming after, they're upset with the New York Times and the Washington Post. I'll put a headline up of theirs today. It may get my channel banned, our channel banned. But okay, so here's just to sort of show you the craziness that's going on. Down below, I want the lower part of that. Oh, here, never mind. I've got a graphic for it here on the right. This is from the San Francisco Chronicle yesterday or today. Is the rainbow flag no longer enough? And so they talk about all the different flags that they need, like the straight ally flag, the transgender, the lesbian pride, here we go, bisexual pride, asexual pride, genderqueer pride, non-binary pride, pride progress, two-spirit pride, transgender straight, Philadelphia pride. Why would anybody have Philadelphia pride? I think I know what that's related to. And by the way, pray for me right now because I'm trying to decide whether I bring something up. Just because it's sort of related to some of what San Francisco is known for, and it's not rice-a-roni, okay? Anyway, so here's a headline that everybody is just upset about, and this is what I'm wrestling with, how much I talk about. COVID outbreak in Massachusetts shows variant's power. Immunized people, New York Times, can spread virus, the CDC reports. CDC guy, he's on Twitter posting all caps, like, you can't say that, you're taking it out of context and all of this stuff. So here's the deal. There was an outbreak that appears to be related to a holiday weekend on Cape Cod at Provincetown. Now, if you know what Provincetown is known for, it's known for, let's call it the San Francisco Resort of the East. If you want to understand a little bit more about it, and I do like some of the stuff that he writes, but he is a gay man, Andrew Sullivan, and he wrote an article this week on his website or blog called How I Learned to Love Living with the Virus, or something like that, How I Learned to Live with the Virus. And he talks about the parties that were going on in the community that he identifies with, and the rather libertine nature of the activities, to the point where in some of these bars in Provincetown, he said the sweat was dripping off the ceiling and walls. Now this is where this outbreak occurred that led to some of this stuff from the CDC. I don't think anybody else is talking about that, and we're probably done as a channel now for doing that. So we'll be sure to post for sure on Rumble and RTN, but I think you understand the nature of what I'm talking about, that what was going on. I don't even know what to say. It's very difficult to describe, but this is the nature of everything. So I'll have some more comments about some of the follow-on things with that in a moment, but I want to reiterate some of this thing this week. I mentioned this, and one of the problems with doing the midweek update is I'm to the point now where I can't remember what I talked about last week, and I can't remember what I talked about midweek, and they all kind of run together. And so when I look at my slide deck, as I try to edit things out, I start with like 200 slides now, and I try to cut out, okay, did I talk about this? Did I talk about this? So I'm going to re-plow ground. But the way you learn sometimes is by repeating things. And so this was posted by Jack Posobiec, who's a sort of open source intel type guy, national security type guy on Twitter. Biden Pentagon to welcome discredited anti-Christian SPLC activists to advise counter-extremism working group. And I want to remind you, you can go back into my updates if you can find it. Update I did back in 2015 on the seminar that took place at either Georgetown or George Washington University, run by the Obama Department of Justice and a representative from the Southern Poverty Law Center, where they talked about how they were going to work together and they're going to identify extremist groups. Well, this is coming back again. So if you look at this Countering Extremism Working Group, subcommittees, lines of efforts, this thing on this paper here on the right, and they have these advocacy groups, and down, if you look down the list there, you'll see Southern Poverty Law Center. So I talked a little bit about this last week, that this thing is countering violent extremism, and there is this group, it's called Moonshot CVE. Now, they dropped the CVE from their name just in the last month or so, but they were called for many years Moonshot CVE, Countering Violent Extremism, and they are issuing these white papers. So as I mentioned last week, like they have this thing that they issued to the federal government about white supremacy search terms and trends in the United States. They also did a redirect method for Canada. In other words, if somebody goes in and looks for information about the true history of Black Lives Matter, it will redirect them to something. There appears to be ties to the Obama Foundation with this group. This person is recommended. It says here, this is from the Obama Foundation website, Meet the Leaders. Obama leaders are emerging leaders. It talks about this is for their Europe 2020, explore our work in Europe. And one of the people that they identify as now they call it Moonshot Solutions, is one of the co-founders. She's an emerging leader under the Obama Foundation. Remember, everything is being done to drive the narrative. You can see this with the Select Committee to investigate something that happened in Washington, D.C. back in earlier part of this year. I won't identify it specifically, but there is a committee to investigate what happened. And I've got a solution, okay? You don't need no stinking committee. Release the 14,000 hours of video that you have and let everybody in America investigate it. And you guys go do something that is going to solve some problems that we have. Instead of making more. That's just my way of solution. But back in March of 2019, before this whole thing started, Moonshot Solutions, then known as Moonshot CVE, had done this anti-vax online. In other words, who are the people that are questioning vaccines? Now, listen, I'm not a scientist, but I know the scientific method. The whole scientific method, is it not, is based on developing a hypothesis and then investigating it. We now live in a situation where you're not allowed to do that. And if you do, you're not allowed to talk about it. People who do, they're deplatformed, their bios are removed from Wikipedia. They're like erased from humanity. People who, I could stand up here and give you, at risk to our channel, the examples of people who quote the CDC information. They take a direct quote from the Center for Disease Control's own websites and publication, posted on Twitter, and they're banned. This is insane. It makes perfect sense if you know what the whole agenda is. This is challenging. This is why it's challenging times. It's cancel culture. It is what is happening. It's not theoretical. It's not, for many years in Bible prophecy, people would talk about, we think that the Bible says that there will be a revived nation of Israel in the end times. And people used to think, you're crazy, man. There's no way that's going to happen. They've been gone for 2,000 years. The Hebrew language is dead. Well, how did that work out? It changed. And so when we talk about things like the mark of the beast, that there will be this thing by which you can buy or sell, without which you won't be able to buy or sell. How's that going to happen? Oh, it's going to be a barcode. Oh, yeah? We're way beyond barcodes now in today's world. And you'll see some more examples of this. So they talk about this anti-vax audience and everything. And then this week, I ran across an article about Moonshot Solutions, formerly known as Moonshot Countering Violent Extremism. And it was in Fast Company. Fast Company is a tech magazine, kind of slick, kind of neat at times. But look at what they have. One secret weapon against extremism. Google ads promoting mindfulness. So this is one of Moonshot Solutions' solutions to countering violent extremism. And it relates back to what they did for Canada, the redirect searches. And so they use Google ads. You know those things that annoy you altogether, unless you're using Brave or some other browser that blocks them. They pop up all the time. They... Pam and I can't remember what we were talking about the other day. Oh, we got something from a company that we ordered, and it was on metal, and it was bent. And we got another one from the same company that wasn't done right. So we called them about the first one that wasn't done right, not the one that was bent, but the first one. And they said, okay, we'll send you a new one, and you can do whatever you want with the one we sent you. And then all of a sudden, yesterday, a package shows up, and it's the one that was bent. It was a new one of the one that was bent, but we never asked them to send the one that was bent, except we talked about it in the house. So then we started joking like, hey, we sure could use a new refrigerator. The refrigerator's pretty nice. We could use a new refrigerator, full of food, too. Don't just bring us a fridge that's empty. But it hasn't showed up yet. So we're testing the artificial intelligence right now. But so this Moonshot says, well, one of the things, okay, so violent extremists, these people, they're into guns, they oppose the government. So we'll just redirect them to mindfulness ads. We'll have them pop up in their feed. And they say this works. This is like... an anesthetic for the people that are upset with the way things are going. We'll talk to them about meditation and yoga. And so this is the people that the government is relying on. This thing I don't even have time to talk about, but Democrats' path to citizenship. This is from Bloomberg. So this is not a, fly-by-night conservative organization or anything like that. Democrats' path to citizenship for $8 million in economic plan. What they're trying to do is they're trying to change the demographic composition of parts of the country. That's what they're doing. So they'll allow people in that they think will support them politically. And they'll move them to Tennessee or Texas and that type of thing. That's why the governor in Texas is upset. Aside from the part that these people are coming in with a certain Charlie Vector thing and they're not testing them for it and they're just sending them out. Because I guess it's okay for them, but the rest of everybody needs to be locked down. Sydney, Australia, they're sending the military door to door to make sure that people that are in the house actually have a right to be in the house, that they're of the same household. And if not, you get fined. That's Sydney, Australia. It's pretty brutal. And they have different targets. So until 80% of the people are jabbed, they will be in lockdown. They're going to go through at least the end of August. And they had a big protest last week, and the police came out when they said they're going to have a protest this weekend, and they blocked off the main park in the center of Sydney. I'm talking like military-type vehicles and everything. And if I shared with you the numbers of what's happening with regard to Charlie Vector in Australia, you would say, why are they doing this? And so what we see is now it appears to be about control. You're going to comply, whether you like it or not. So even this report from Moonshot, it said, this report, the fact they have the search terms, so they got to warn everybody that just the search terms are going to expose you to racist and violent extremist language. It's, I know I talked about this last week. So they talk about the top 10 sub-themes: anti-BLM, anti-black incitement to violence, general anti-black, Anne Frank. I don't have no idea why Anne Frank is on there. And related to this is this kind of scandal that's been going on with an Israeli company called NSO that sold software to different governments around the world, and it was used, it's alleged by The Guardian, that it was used to spy on people. Now, NSO has come out and said, we're not going to sell this software to these governments anymore. But it's pretty good hacking software. So you also see this, what you see is you're starting to see these calls for cybersecurity, a global cybersecurity panel control structure. Naftali Bennett called for that in a speech recently. So, hang on here. I have to reorganize my slide deck a little bit. I wonder where that went. Give me 1 minute. Okay. So I don't have a source for this, except I talked to someone, a banker, who was on a phone call with the Federal Reserve the other day. I said, how did it go? He said it was frightening. They think they have it solved, but the whole system is at risk. So here is I found this on Reddit, on a financial blog. It was on Facebook as well. And this has been going around. This has been updated over the last 10 years. So this is America's finances as of June 30th. Okay, so do you see the revenue, deficit, and debt? Now, does anybody that is capable of fogging a mirror, you know what that means? They're breathing enough that you can hold a mirror up and it'll make a little steam on the mirror. How do you think this is going? This does not appear sustainable. I said, how do they think it's going to happen? He goes, it's worse than this, from the Federal Reserve call. They anticipate that over the rest of the Biden administration, that the federal deficit cumulatively will approach $23 to $24 trillion. How do they do that? They print a lot of money. What happens when you print a lot of money? You run the risk of inflation. What happens when countries go into severe inflation? We've got a few examples in our history. The good one was Zimbabwe. One of them led to a world war. I said, how are they going to finance this? He said, well, one way they're going to do that, one of the proposals that they talked about, and I've seen this floated, is they're going to take 23% of your 401k, and they're going to give you a bond in return. I said, that's my money. He goes, not in their mind, it's not. You didn't pay taxes on it yet, so it's not your money. You should have to pay an average tax rate on that of 23%, so that's what they're going to take right now. And this is, I don't know that it's been proposed in Congress yet, but it's coming. And I don't even know if they'll put it through Congress. They've just, somebody, the basement operation that's running the White House is going to just throw out some executive orders. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just telling you that this is what happens. Couple that with this is Lael Brainerd, who talked at a meeting the other day. She's a Federal Reserve chairman, or a member. I think she runs one of the regions. And she says, I can't imagine a future without a digital dollar. Here was the quote. The dollar is very dominant in international payments. And if you have the other major jurisdictions in the world with a digital currency, China's trying to get one, a CBDC offering, and the U.S. doesn't have one, I just can't wrap my head around that. It's inevitable, she says. Digital dollar. Now, the scramble's on, is the United States going to remain the reserve currency of the world if this happens? I think the Fed's realizing if it's not the digital reserve currency, we have big problems. It will make huge change in the United States in terms of economics and life and all that other stuff. It also leads to a lot of concern, and this relates to Revelation 13, without which you cannot buy or sell. Because they'll just, well, I'll talk about that in just a moment. This is from Foreign Policy, just appeared this morning. The Bidenomics revolution, if he succeeds, the president will cast 40 years of economic doctrine on history's ash heap. But that's a big if. I don't know that it's a big if. This is what the plan is. You tie this into Davos and the Great Reset. I saw somebody post something about, we need to resist the Great Reset. And this person said, there's no such thing as a Great Reset. To which people posted Klaus Schwab's book, COVID-19 and the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum thing, and the person kept saying, yeah, but that doesn't mean they're trying to kill everybody off. Well, that kind of changed the subject, don't you think, just a little bit? And so what you will notice is that there are woke people, but the woke people are really the unwoke. They're asleep people when it comes to the reality of what's going on in the world. So we call them woke. That's supposed to be sort of negative, but it really means they don't know what's going on. They're completely oblivious. Do you notice this in your conversations with people? You will bring something up and they'll say, what are you talking about? That's not happening. It is. You might say certain city is in lockdown. And they'll say, no, they're not in lockdown. What are you talking about? And so that's why people go to alternative platforms, Getter, even Twitter, to get information, because it's censored everywhere. And people just say, well, it wasn't on the local news or NBC or MSNBC or CNN. CNN's not covering it. Can't be true. So that's why you have this guy like Chris Como. He's yelling at some guy about, the guy says, you were violating the rules your brother put in place. There's no proof of that. There's all kinds of proof of that. It's unbelievable. So here is a recent tweet. I talked a little bit about this. This comes from a guy related to the J Street, which claims that it's pro-Israel, but it's sort of like calling somebody woke when they're really asleep. They say they're pro-Israel, which means they're really anti-Israel in their policies. It's a lobbying organization. So remember all the Ben and Jerry's thing? Well, somebody released, don't know if it's true, supposedly there was a cable from Israel, somebody in the Israeli government, to put pressure on Ben and Jerry's over its decision not to sell into the occupied territories, has possible Foreign Agents Registration Act implications if any of the U.S. groups acted on the request. And we know this is a problem. Look what happened to Michael Flynn. He spent millions on lawyers because he was charged under this act, because he was making phone calls in the transition period, because he's going to be in power in a couple weeks, and he gets charged, and his life is ruined. There's a guy who is head of the President Trump's inauguration committee. Name is Barack. He's charged now with a felony under this because they're saying he was an agent for the United Arab Emirates, an unregistered agent. And listen, if FBI people show up, you need to get an attorney before you talk to them. I'm just telling you. I know a little bit about how the system works, and you need to be very careful. You can talk to them if you want, but a lot of what they do is they'll interview somebody for hours, and they will ask you questions about what might be in the interviewee's email from years ago. And so it's a memory test. And if you get it wrong, they'll charge you with lying to the FBI during an investigation. And you'll never have committed the underlying crime, but they'll send you to prison for lying for what they claim is a lie during the interview process. It happens. I mean, it happened to Martha Stewart. It happened to people that were connected with Trump. And how many emails do you have in your email boxes? Now, I look right now, I'm about ready to declare email bankruptcy. I have 40,000 unread emails in one of my email accounts. Okay? And it's a lot of it's junk, okay? But it's a real problem. Well, if somebody came and interviewed me about, and first of all, I don't even know if I opened the email. And secondly, I mean, back 20 years ago, I was working on a big piece of litigation, and I was getting 150 to 250 emails a day about just that case. So if somebody showed up to interview me about those emails, I might not remember that email. So just a technique, if you're answering questions in those interviews, you say, well, you know, I'd have to rely on what the emails that I wrote back in such and such a time said. I'm sure that it was covered in there. If it was covered, it would be in my emails. And I'm not engaged in a memory test here. You're allowed to say that kind of thing. Make your interview longer, but you need to get an attorney. But anyway, so here's this thing from this guy, J Street, and it says this. Israeli diplomats were instructed to encourage Jewish organizations, pro-Israel advocacy groups, and evangelical communities to organize demonstrations in front of Ben & Jerry's and Unilever offices and put pressures on investors and distributors for both companies. Now, a certain congressperson picked up on that, and she also wrote a letter to Janet Yellen at the Department of Treasury, Rashida Tlaib, and said, these people are unregistered foreign agents. They are doing things in violation of the law, and therefore anybody who's advocating on behalf of Israel has to be acting at the behest of the Israeli government, and they are therefore should be subjected to losing their 501c3 status. Now, by the way, we're not 501c3 here at FBC, but all churches are tax exempt under the Internal Revenue Code. So, and nobody tells us what we can and cannot say. So here you are, so that they're going after pro-Israel, at least if Rashida Tlaib, and the letter was co-signed by Cori Bush, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and a couple of the other lefty members of the squad. The Democrats won't stand up to this. And so now will the Federal Reserve, when they're not printing money by the container ship full, not a truckload, it's a container ship full now. Are they going to do this? Are they going to go after evangelical groups that might support Israel just because they think it's the right thing to do? But they have a big biblical case for it. But where does it stop? If they're going after you for being pro-Israel, how about we go after her for being a shill for the Palestinian Authority? Which isn't, I guess you could say, well, that's not a country, John. That's my point. It's not a country. You act like it is. But here, this is probably one of the more disturbing things. PayPal partners with ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, to fight extremism and protect marginalized communities. So the Anti-Defamation League is now saying we need to go after these extremists. We need to be countering violent extremists. Do you see how all of this is intertwined? And this is the company. And so what's happened now is that the government, they don't have to restrict your speech. This is what Jen Psuckerberger was talking about in her press briefing a little over a week ago. We contact Facebook. They outsourced taking away constitutional rights. This is unconstitutional. And they'll say, well, the corporations are free to do whatever we want. Oh, are they? On the other hand, you're over here saying, we're going to take away your Section 230 exemption from liability, wink, 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 if you don't, take down these posts that we don't like. So is that pressure? I think that's a pretty easy case to make in court. You just have to get a judge that will actually listen to it and have a bit of a courage to make the decision. Here's what the ADL says. By identifying partners across sectors with common goals and complementary resources, we can make an even greater impact than any of us could do on our own, said Aaron Kaxmer or whatever, Chief Risk Officer and Executive Vice President, Risk and Platforms of PayPal. We are excited to partner with ADL, other nonprofits, and law enforcement in our fight against hate in all of its form. So Tucker interviewed Jerry Kelly the other night. I do watch his show. That's about the only one that I watch in terms of news, because I think he does a pretty good job. So here they talk about this. Here's the segment.
PayPal has just announced a partnership with something called the Anti-Defamation League, which is an arm of the Democratic Party, to comb through financial transactions and target what they're calling extremists. So what's an extremist? Well, according to the ADL, which again, to be totally clear, is not an independent group, but an arm of the Democratic Party, which acts on behalf of the Democratic Party and the Biden administration, this show is extremist content. So are a lot of people who are not only mainstream, but moderate, but oppose the agenda of the Democratic Party. So there's that. At the same time, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, YouTube, and a lot of other big tech companies are working on a shared database of so-called extremists. That would be white supremacists and far-right militias. Nobody's for white supremacists or far-right militias. The question is, what is a white supremacist and a far-right militia? They get to decide. And that means they're shutting everyone down who criticizes the Biden administration. Jesse Kelly understands this. He's the host of the Jesse Kelly Show. He joins us tonight. Jesse Kelly, thanks so much for coming on. So maybe when people like you started complaining about online censorship years ago and were written off as some kind of paranoid wacko, the Republican Party should have paid attention and gotten a handle on the tech sector before they just basically turn this into an unfree country. That's my editorial. I'll let you take it from there.
Well, if we're going to sit around and wait for the Republican Party to actually grow a spine and get ahead of an issue, Tucker, then we're going to be waiting until we're older than Joe Biden is now. These people have never gotten ahead of anything. The Republican Party will arrive at the correct position on an issue at the precise moment it becomes too late to do any meaningful good. That's what they do.
It's so nicely put. I can't really add to it. So the tragedy of the ADL is here you have a group with, I think, a noble history, addressing an actual problem that has morphed into just the enforcement arm of the Democratic National Committee. But people haven't readjusted in their minds what it is. And so they have this unearned moral authority, which they use as a cudgel on behalf of the Democratic Party. Why does nobody say that?
Because people can't catch up, Tucker. These communists are moving so fast. Normal people can't catch up. You're obviously all over it. I'm all over it. But people can't wrap their minds around what's actually happening. The commies are moving through every single institution to silence you, to silence normal people. You mentioned what an extremist is. To the communists who run Facebook and the ADL and PayPal and all these places, if you believe God created the earth, you're an extremist. If you believe in guns, you're an extremist. If you believe if you believe women's sports shouldn't be occupied by people who need a jockstrap, you're an extremist. These people think any sane, rational thought is extreme now.
So if you think that actually men can't have babies, then you can't do online financial transactions?
Well, that's the thing, Tucker. They're never going to stop. I want people to understand that as crazy as things are now, they don't think they're getting crazy at PayPal, at Facebook, and whatnot. They think they haven't gone nearly far enough. They're not looking around saying to themselves, whoa, we've taken this too far. They're saying to themselves, why haven't we done more to shut these people up? I mean, Tucker, you were just spied on by the NSA. That should be the biggest story in the United States of America. They dropped it like a hot potato in 12 hours. And the president of the United States isn't going to do anything about it. He has the brain function of Major Biden, and the people around him are all communists too.
So, I mean, if they can prevent you from speaking, prevent you from defending yourself, prevent you from working at a job, prevent you from buying or selling things online, I mean, at that point, how are we free?
Well, we're not free. We're already not free, Tucker. Let's be honest. How many things could you go on TV or go on social media more specifically right now and say that would get you ostracized from society? Basic truths right now. They don't need laws. That's how this got so dangerous. All they needed really was corporate America. It's the most dangerous thing they ever took over besides the education system. As soon as they got corporate America, they'll shut down your bank account. They'll shut down your social media. They'll shut you out of life in general. Oh, no, they didn't throw you in prison yet, but they're just going to wait until the cameras are off.
Revelation 13. Digital currency. We don't like what you say or you stand for. You're a young earth creationist? You believe God created the world, let alone a young earth creationist? Relatively young earth, let's make it that. We're switching you off. You're dangerous. There was a Yale professor, medical school. In a lecture, I believe it was, I think I have the story correct, he referenced birthing mothers or women. The students reported him. It should be birthing people. Remember how everybody laughed when we made this point? They were using birthing people in some of the government documents, the budget documents. And there's, oh, John, they don't mean that. The Yale professor, he had to, this is sort of the, it's scientism. It's a religion that they have. And so he had to make a public confession of his sin for having used normal language to describe a biological fact. Men give birth, not women. Or what was it that Jesse Kelly said? People who need a jockstrap can't be women. A pretty good description of the problem. They're going to have weightlifter from New Zealand, and that's okay, boy. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, this gal, whatever her name is, she's on board with that. Remember the one I played the clip of her a couple weeks ago, what she said last year? If you want information about this problem in the world right now, the only source that you can trust is us. If you hear it from anybody else, don't trust them. We will be your source of truth. I mean, Orwell couldn't even think that stuff up when he wrote his book. And in 1984 has now become a government manual, a manual for how to do government, as opposed to something that a lot of us read and were frightened by. Challenging times. So here's more from this PayPal thing. The initiative with PayPal will be led through the ADL Center on Extremism. There we go. Countering violent extremism, a leading authority on extremism, terrorism, and hate. PayPal and ADL will focus on further uncovering and disrupting the financial pipelines that support extremist and hate movements. In addition to extremist and hate anti-government organizations, i.e. anti the Biden administration or other government that does what we want, the initiative will focus on actors and networks spreading and profiting from all forms of hate and bigotry against any community. All of us, including the private sector, have a critical role to play in fighting the spread of extremism and hate. With this new initiative, we're setting a new standard for companies to bring their expertise to critical social issues. We have a unique opportunity. This is Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the ADL. We have a unique opportunity to further understand how hate spreads and develop key insights that will inform the efforts of the financial industry, law enforcement, and our communities in mitigating extremist threats. So, what's one takeaway for this today? You need to not give money to the ADL. That's point number one. So here's another one. This is another one. This is the ACLU. Now, when I was in law school, the American Civil Liberties Union stood for the American Civil Liberties Union. They would stand up for constitutional rights. For example, when a neo-Nazi group wanted to march in Skokie, Illinois, where a lot of Holocaust survivors lived, the ADL or the ACLU came in and said, listen, that's free speech. It's hate speech, but we allow that to be done in our country. So you would think, okay, free speech, that's Amendment 1, right to bear arms, Amendment number 2. ACLU would be on board with that one, right? Here it is. This is what the ACLU said. They tweeted this on July 25th, last Sunday. Racism is foundational to the Second Amendment and its inclusion in the Bill of Rights. Learn more from experts Carol Anderson and Charles Howard Candler on this episode of the At Liberty podcast. So here's another thing to put on your to-do list. Do not listen to Carol Anderson or Charles Howard Candler because they're leftist. And I looked at this. ACLU News and Commentary. Do black Americans have the right to bear arms? Anti-blackness determined the inclusion of the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights and has informed the unequal and racist application of gun laws. And now this is the fundraiser part. This is the ACLU. Our rights are under attack. No. You see how they flip everything upside down? Our rights are under attack by you. So here's another to-do list thing. It's usually negative. Don't give to the ACLU. Find another organization to give to. ACLJ, Alliance Defending Freedom, Pacific Justice Institute, et cetera, et cetera. Support them. So here's another, and so I looked through the ACLU Twitter feed. This was I felt like Alice in Wonderland falling down into the hole here. Here's some of them. Here's one, cancel student debt. What does that have to do with civil liberties? Pelosi says that has to be an act of Congress. The Biden administration can't do it. But just wait, we've got a 4-seat majority, and we're tied in the others, but we'll get it done. Here's another thing they said, in solitary confinement now. Oh, so the ACLU is going and representing all the people that got arrested back in January that are being held in solitary confinement? Are they? No. And this is, so I have a background in criminology, master's degree, so I studied this stuff years ago. So what they always, the big thing back when I was in graduate school, getting close to half a century ago, but these were the things that they were being talked about, was labeling. You label someone as a bad person, therefore they'll live up to the label that you give them. That was the, so that was the labeling theory of sociology and criminology. So there's a big dispute about defunding the police. Jim Zuckerberger says, well, that's what the Republicans want to do. We don't want to defund the police. Seattle City Council votes to do it. Minneapolis votes to do it. We don't want to defund the police. And so here is and what do you take from all this? They're lying to you. The only thing that you can trust as being accurate on this page is ACLU, is the organization. So this is a thing they have for racism and policing. I actually signed up for the course. It's a 4-part course. Part 1 was just released. It says, want to know more about police, race, and the calls to divest? Yet they're all saying, well, we don't want to defund the police. What do you think divest means? This is their bullet points from the course. Divestment. And as important, reinvestment refers to a shift of power, funding, resources, and responsibility away from the punitive and harmful institution of policing and into life-affirming, community-based, and community-led supportive services. Defunding. Defunding refers to the same reallocation of power, funds, and resources from the police as divestment. Abolition, to replace policing, prison, jails, and other punitive programs with other systems of public safety entirely. For many, abolition is the final goal of the divest, reinvest framework. Who supports defunding the police? Wow, I'd love to have these people on the witness stand for just a short period of time. They go through the history of policing, and they say the brutal murder of George Floyd by police sparks the largest protest in U.S. history. Oh. Well, now we know they were really protests that happened. Remember when we said they happened, and the guy's there, the CNN guy or whoever is there with the microphone, and the buildings are burning in the back of him, and he's like, yeah, this is a mostly peaceful protest. What? Alternatives, this is another one. Alternatives to incarceration offer replicate the same systems that fostered mass incarceration. And so this is related to this Department of Justice thing that I showed you last week, where they say it's only because of racism that there's a higher proportion of people in the black community that are in prison. They're not committing crimes. And the only reason they commit crimes is because police go to those neighborhoods more often. Well, like in Chicago, every weekend in Chicago, there's like 100 people shot and 8 to 20 killed. And the police are probably going to go to those neighborhoods. And if they don't go to those neighborhoods, what's the cry? You're racist. You won't come to our community. Look at this. This is Daniel Greenfield. She cheered Black Lives Matter rage. Biden picked her as a federal prosecutor, a U.S. attorney. Here's what Daniel Greenfield said. Murders are up 54% in Boston. Fatal shootings shot up 60%, and commercial burglaries rose 62%. Now Biden wants to make the Soros DA responsible for this mess a U.S. attorney. On her website, Suffolk County DA Rachel Rollins, Suffolk County is Boston, has a list of crimes that she will not, I think that's right, Suffolk County. Yeah, because Cambridge is Middlesex. Rollins has a list of crimes she will not prosecute, ranging from shoplifting to stealing anything under $250, breaking and entering a vacant property, driving with a revoked license, malicious destruction of property, threats, and drug possession with intent to distribute. Effectively, these crimes have been legalized. Biden claims that Democrats oppose police defunding and the pro-crime policy that have plunged the nation's major cities into a vortex of violence. Choosing Rollins shows that's a lie. Rollins, like other DAs backed by Soros, has worked to dismantle the criminal justice system, leaving people to be terrorized by a crime wave unleashed by BLM. Did you see this Chaz guy, whatever his name is, that's the prosecutor in San Francisco now? He's talking about people, this one guy, he's been arrested like 5 times. They got him on video coming into like a CVS or Rite Aid or something like that, right in the heart of San Francisco, on a bike, stuffing stuff in a garbage bag and riding out the front door. I'm sure you've seen the video. And so they asked the prosecutor about that, and he says, well, we don't know what motivated him. We don't know what his employment status is. How about the destruction that he's doing to a business in your city? And they're now closing them, all their outlets, and people rely on these. Pretty soon, San Francisco is going to be Lebanon. Do you know that? In Lebanon, they can't do surgeries in Lebanon. Couple reasons. They don't have anesthesia drugs. They don't have pain medication. I saw an interview with a lady I think it was on the BBC, a nurse in an emergency room, a hospital in Lebanon, and she said, here's the medicine cabinet. We have 2 little bottles of acetaminophen and other things that cost 2 to 3 cents a dose we can't afford because we don't have any money. And then they only get about 20% of the time do they have power. So it's kind of hard to operate on somebody in an operating room when the power goes out. And they're running on generators. They're breaking down their generators. Saw a guy repairing a generator. He said this thing ran 30 consecutive hours because there was no other power in Beirut. The city that used to be called the Paris of the Middle East. So here's this thing. So here's what this Rollins is now nominee for U.S. attorney. When the Black Lives Matter race riots devastated cities, this is Daniel Greenfield. You got to read Daniel Greenfield. Put that on your to-do list. Rollins ranted, this burning rage that you are seeing when you turn your TV on or you hear my voice is real. People are fed up, and to the white community that is now waking up to see this rage, we have been telling you this forever. Buildings can be fixed, Rollins argued, while falsely accusing police officers of having lynched and murdered black people. The pro-crime DA then defended the rioters, claiming it is completely ironic to have to say to you, please don't be violent, please keep your voice down. Please be silent and comply with all the police requirements, when in fact it's those very people that murder us with impunity. In St. Louis, what's her name? Kimberly Gardner, the DA there, Soros-backed DA. They have people on trial for murder. The prosecutors are not showing up at the trial. And the charges have to be dismissed. I don't want to be too alarmist, but in certain places, the whole system is broken down. When do you yell fire? Well, if you're a CNN reporter and there's a fire going on behind you, you don't yell fire. This is just, it's challenging times, is it not? If Senate Republicans do nothing and Rollins becomes the U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts, which criminals will she refuse to charge? And which political opponents will she prosecute? So I talked last week about the pingdemic. They have these apps in Britain, and I don't remember if I covered this great article by Ross Clark in The Spectator. We need to act now to block Britain's social credit system. So this is the problem. So you see, they don't like what you say, switch you off. They don't like what you are, because we know what you're doing about that thingy majiggy, We'll switch you off. So anyone who thinks that COVID certification would be a temporary measure is fooling themselves. July 13th article, Daily Telegraph, about passports make many less likely to do that. Compulsory thingies about this thing are a step too far. Ross Clark says this, I had in mind that it would take 2 to 5 years for a passport scheme to morph into a Chinese-style social credit system. In fact, it took 2 weeks. This morning it was reported that the government is planning to introduce a health app in January, which will monitor our shopping, our exercise levels, or our intake of fruits and vegetables, and reward us with virtue points, which we can exchange for discounts, free tickets to, well, it doesn't say what kind of event is unclear, and other goodies. Capita and Serco, the usual beneficiaries of the Minty government schemes, are reported to be bidding for the chance to run it. Let us leave aside the rather obvious possibilities for fraud. Just think how many virtue points you would accumulate by persuading someone to take your phone jogging with them while you tuck in to takeaway pizza, which you bought with means other than your smartphone. You can enjoy your junk food and get a free pass to the All-In Wrestling to boot. So by the way, if you're going down the street and you see somebody's got like a 13.1 or 26.2 sticker on their car, you know what that means? That means they ran a half marathon, 13.1 miles, or a full marathon, 26.2 miles. Follow them home and make a deal with them. Like, when you go out jogging, can I give you my smartphone? I'll get you a holder to put on your arm and everything. I'll load it with the podcast that you want. So I can go eat pizza. You think you need to plan? Put this on your to-do list. Make friends with, the narcissist that put how far they run I don't put a sticker on my car with my golf scores. I did joke on Facebook this week, where can I get a 0.0 sticker? Well, so this is in the Spectator, great article. Barry Weiss, she has an article from a doctor. What happens when doctors can't tell the truth? It's a problem. So let's look a little bit at the Middle East in the 2 hours that we have remaining. And so this is a report on the rockets that were fired from Gaza. These are the ones that were fired during the thing back in May 10th to the 21st. The red, those were rockets that were fired in Gaza, and the blue is where they landed. These are the ones that didn't make it into Israel. This is the ones that some people even suggested seriously, well, it's not fair that Israel didn't shoot those down. I mean, they shot the ones that were going to fall just over that border. I mean, couldn't they just set their Iron Dome up to do that? And the people that have suggested this are seriously mentally challenged, but serious nonetheless. This is the rocket ranges that happened. I mentioned this the other night. Let me go to this. So, Niall Ferguson is a fellow at one of the parts of the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. And let me see if I hope I emailed his article to myself. No, I didn't. Well, he has a great article. It's in the Jerusalem Post. I couldn't find it online last night, but it is in the digital version of the Jerusalem Post. Now, he's married to Ayan Hirsi Ali, the Somalian person who's spoken up against a certain religion at great risk to her life. She had to flee Netherlands because of that. One of her associates was murdered on the streets of Amsterdam, I believe. And so he writes this article in the Jerusalem Post today, Niall Ferguson. And I don't think he's a Christian. He might even be agnostic or an atheist. The world's cascade of disasters is not a coincidence. He starts off with reference to Judy Garland singing to Mickey Rooney in 1938. It never rains, but what it pours. If Lady Luck should happen to desert you, you stub your toe, ouch, you hit your elbow, ooh, you bump your head, ooh, you step on a tack and you let out a howl. There's soap in your eyes and you can't find a towel. You try to comb your hair but can't arrange it, spill orange juice on your dress and have to change it. Then all day long, everything you touch goes wrong. And he says this, the same thing happens in life, the song goes on, but on a very much larger scale. Ferguson says this, too right. Poor humanity just can't catch a break these days. No sooner does the COVID-19 pandemic appear to be receding than a new Delta variant sweeps the world, far more contagious than the earlier versions of the virus. Simultaneously, there are disastrous floods in Europe's Rhineland and China's Henan province. By the way, maybe 10% or more of China's crops are gone because of what happened in that flooding in the heart of China. And it happened in a city, I don't even remember the name of the city. The city is bigger than New York City. They have a bunch of those. 12 million people live there. Unbelievable. And we don't even know these cities. Huge wildfires rage in Siberia and in Oregon. And in a succession of countries, Afghanistan, Cuba, and Haiti, to name just three, political order threatens to break down. The idea of a time of trouble is a period when everything goes wrong. Now listen, this is a largely secular guy, but very learned, is deeply rooted in the human imagination. In the book of Exodus, God inflicts 10 plagues on Egypt. He turns the water of the Nile into blood. He sends frogs, then lice, then flies, then a pestilence that kills the livestock, then a plague of festering boils, then a hailstorm, then locusts, then 3 days of darkness. He signs off with a disease that kills the firstborn children of every Egyptian family, not to mention the firstborn calves. By the way, he probably demonstrated better knowledge of the Bible than a lot of pastors today, unfortunately. God had a purpose in plaguing Egypt to persuade the Pharaoh to release the Israelites from bondage. In our secular age, we seek similar meanings in bad times. The obvious inference from images of cars reduced to flotsam and jetsam by torrential rain in places as far apart as Kreuzberg, as Jingzhou, that's a city in China, I couldn't remember, is that we need to get a lot more serious about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I saw somebody made up a meme of Greta Thunberg, that little scold from, where's she from, Sweden? They had morphed her into a 65-year-old. And she was saying, we still only have one more week. However, we can see that there are connections between these disasters and that they are in fact parts of interlocking trends. This is a secular guy. Do you understand? There's maybe more truth in this article than you would hear from the vast majority of pulpits in America today. That this is all connected. It appears that given constraints of our existing energy technologies, we cannot support much more than our current population. This is not to say that we can overcome these problems. And that's right. A friend of mine posted this week, and he said, we've been dealing with climate change since people appeared on the earth. You drive 2 hours north of here, you can point to a lake that's filled with glaciers that used to be a mile thick with people around. So there was global warming, right? What did they do? Well, you could say they didn't do very well with it. They built Cleveland and Toledo and Ashtabula and Detroit. But other than that, people dealt with it. The Cleveland Guardians. If you fold the fabric the right way, it looks like the old name. Just telling you. Go home and do it today. Put that on your to-do list. This is not to say that we can overcome problems. History suggests that we can. European populations by the 1300s had become rather too large in relation to the basic technologies of that era, at a time when the world's population was just over 390 million. You can go to Mesa Verde in Colorado, the cliff-dwelling national park. Now, I don't know what they tell you now, but when Pam and I were there 21 years ago, this month, we took a tour. And the guy said, you know, they over-farmed and it changed the climate and they had to move. Now, that guy would get fired today. And I said, I bet they were peeing in the creek too, right? And he didn't answer that one. But with most people engaged in subsistence agriculture, did not take much. A succession of bad years of bad weather and bad harvest to render the population highly susceptible to a pandemic of bubonic plague. The population of Europe began to decline before the Black Death it struck in the 1340s. The combination of climatic disappointments and a novel pathogen led to a demographic disaster. The plague then unleashed a kind of cascade as mass deaths led to economic and social dislocation, which in turn led to religious and political upheaval. At this point, we move from coincidence to causation. Well, you can read the article. This is very fascinating. And it essentially says, you know, it sounds apocalyptic out there. That lady who's head of the CDC said yesterday, just give us 2 more weeks, 2 weeks to correct this. Okay. So here, this is an article from, I think it's the Times of London. You think you melted last week? Prepare for 40 centigrade Britain. I think 37 degrees centigrade is about 100 degrees. So that's hot in the UK. They're not used to that. This is just from mainstream papers. Climate experts warn extreme weather has veered off scale. You see what this climate change thing is doing, though? It is giving people a very convenient excuse to explain away God's judgment when it comes. And all the woke pastors that are signing on to this, like the big church down on Cooper Road, you know what I'm talking about. They're ignoring it too. Here's a photo. Left side, Alberta wheat field 2020. Right side, same wheat field, exact same location. Farmer stands there and takes pictures every year, 2021. Oh, barley field, excuse me. I think that's Alberta. That's from, Alberta farmers, southern Alberta. That's what they would call part of Canada's breadbasket. This is troubling. Germany must step up its fight against climate emergency. That's Angela Merkel. And this is an article from the Financial Times. We can no longer say floods are an act of God. Do you see what I'm saying? That they have this excuse now to explain away. And so when you often say, it's like you read Revelation and you see this seal, this trumpet, and people seem to be going on their merry way, ignoring what's going on, and because they'll have an explanation for it. This isn't God. God would never do this. He's got other stuff. China flooding each year, it seems. Dams are at risk from intense rainfall. South Korea, less rainy days, but higher rainfall points to more intensity. Again, acceleration, convergence, logistics, understanding. Washington Post. Amid fire and floods, warnings of what yet may come. Fierce heat wave puts habitats biodiversity in jeopardy. In disastrous summer, climate inaction lurks. So that's the article by Niall Ferguson. And this article, in this morning's Al-Ghad, Ghad, newspaper from Jordan. The title of this is Apocalypse, the end of the world. That's the title in Arabic. The end of the world now. So when secular people are woke to this, what's wrong with some of these people in the church? Lots wrong. So he goes in this. There's the program Apocalypse. The program traces the development of the belief in the end of the world from its origin in the Jewish experience after the Babylonian captivity to the modern era. Biblical historians and scholars are interviewed to discuss the concept of the end of time and the day of judgment in order to clarify ideas of mass destruction and how these ideas shape the cultural world. In fact, the concept of the end of the world has affected civilizations in many ways for more than 2,000 years. The book of Revelation, the last book of the New Testament, is central to the belief in the Western consciousness about the end of the world and forms a significant part of the book of Revelation and originated in the 600-year period of Jewish political history that included wars and defeat at the hands of foreign invaders, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans. This is where I should put up the Daniel statue from Daniel chapter 2. Shaped culture over the 200 years before Jesus was born. Since then, the end of the world has been in people's minds as the final settlement of the reckoning. The concept of the end of the world remains a very powerful force to this day, especially among true believers. Not only that, but the apocalypse has recently spawned a new variation known as climate apocalypse, a term that, in an interesting way, generates 7,610,000 visits to Google search engine every 0.58 seconds. So this is why we talk about this stuff. So a guy, probably a Muslim, writing in a Jordanian paper this morning says, something's going on. And I'll bet you could drive to a whole bunch of churches around here and you wouldn't hear a peep about any of this. Well, you will hear. In fact, he says the climate apocalypse has an audience as well as a strong following and powerful critics. For these liberators, the apocalypse is only part of Cassandra's somber visions of death and darkness should be ignored and perhaps even parodied. However, some Google searches turn up the most surprising source of doom and gloom. For example, the leaked UN climate report. This is from the AFP. That's a French news agency. The leaked... to the recently leaked draft of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change climate report, which allegedly declares there is a dire warning that we are on the cusp of destroying the planet thanks to the myriad dangers of exacerbating climate change. This refers to the 4,000-page UN report that was leaked to AFP, which will not be published for several months yet. Now, this is kind of interesting because, you know, Greta's running around. It's the end. We only have a week. We only have a month. We only have days. Well, we're going to get the report to you in about 3 months. Okay, I mean, because that's how serious we consider this. We're really stepping up our warning of you. So, you have revelation, you crazy extremists over there at FBC. But our revelation is it's in process. You've had it for 2,000 years. But you understand, do you see how it's a religion? That's the ultimate point. The draft report reportedly describes how climate change will fundamentally reshape life on Earth in coming decades, even if humans can tame planet-warming greenhouse gas emissions, with projections on food supplies, water scarcity, extinction rates, migration, infectious diseases, and extreme weather events. So if we talk about that from a book proved demonstrably true because of the fulfilled prophecy, you people are crazy. But just wait till our report comes. Then you'll have something to talk about in your pulpit. Okay. This is a warning of existential risk, of survival of collapse, said Climate Movement Extinction Rebellion in response to AFP's reporting on what the draft contained. So you see how they're full believers. They don't even have the document yet, and they believe it. That's more faith than a lot of Christians, unfortunately, have. Christians. He says this, what if the IPCC report, the gloom and doom report as it is claimed, hits the mark and states the truth but ends up in a manner similar to all previous IPCC reports as being too conservative? In other words, it doesn't really tell you the full truth. Well, we have the full truth. This is China. Global political futures, the volatile food supply. Niall Ferguson also makes reference to this, the 2021 Global Report on Food Crises around the world. Here are some of the countries. The darker colors have more problems. Look at where a lot of them are centered, though. Here's also the Global Peace Index. And then here's the big, this is their big map. And red is bad, orange is not too good, yellow is moderate. And here's focused on an area of the world that we talk about a lot. The CFR publishes Foreign Affairs. This is one. This is a report they published this week. The United States, China, and Taiwan, a strategy to prevent war. China was having drills, amphibious drills this week, massive amphibious drills. A lot of people are very concerned. The U.S. strategic objective regarding Taiwan should be to preserve its political and economic autonomy. Do you know Foreign Affairs? I know they know this. I'm sure they do. If not, call me and I'll direct you to your prior publications to talk about. This is exactly what the British said they were going to do with Hong Kong. What happened to Hong Kong since Charlie Vector appeared? Hong Kong is not free anymore. People are trying to flee. We would like to be wrong about the possible seriousness of a coming Taiwan crisis. We hope we have exaggerated the danger. We just cannot persuade ourselves that the ominous clouds we see gathering are not really there. So, CFR, welcome to the Doom and Gloom Club. China's declining population. This is from Jerusalem Post, a CCP-made crisis. We've talked a lot about this. China did one-child policy. Do you know that kind of violated like part of Genesis? Be fruitful and multiply. They're facing a pretty steep, if the Lord doesn't return soon, they're facing a pretty steep demographic population decline of hundreds of millions of people in the next generation because of their one-child policy. Now they want to change it. But guess what? They convinced everybody, hey, it's great not to have kids. I saw articles in the New York Times where people were talking about, I celebrate the fact that my children won't have grandchildren for me to mess around with so I can go party. I saw the article. I forget where it was. Vanity Fair, Atlanta, I forget. I read it this week. It happens. Turkey's on the march, report from strategic interests. Of course, they're doing this thing with their blue homeland, trying to get these exclusive economic zones, trying to block the pipeline. They're still at work. Executive summary of this report says, Israel expressed full support to the Republic of Cyprus in the wake of unilateral reopening of the Varosha coastline by Turkey. Because of the dispute that happened, these beach towns have been totally empty. And Turkey's come back and said, hey, we're all for a two-state solution in Cyprus. Why? Because they think it'll give them access to economic zones and will help them build what they call their blue homeland. Erdogan also went into the Hagia Sophia this week. He put up things about, hey, look at this. This is me last year when we took over Hagia Sophia, the largest church in Christendom. He's a committed Muslim. I have videos of him going to kiss the black stone at the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia. When he was a young man, he won oratory awards for, guess what? Standing on the bow of a ferry going between the two sides of Istanbul, reciting the Quran from the bow of the ship. You can see videos of him in London reciting the Quran. I mean, he has nothing there, and he goes for quite a while. It's sort of that singy, songy type thing. I've played those videos here. So let's just look quickly at Israel. Boy, we've got... so this is Danny Gantz in an interview. He said in a special interview to a BBC journalist, originally from Iran, on Tuesday, that Iran is close to nuclear weapons when it comes to enrichment, but not so close in other ways. By the way, this was broadcast on BBC Persia in Farsi, so the Iranians would hear this. This was, I think, a planned thing. The Iranian nuclear project threatens world stability and regional stability and is a challenge for the security of Israel. Gantz addressed Israel's abilities, saying, we have abilities and means that I cannot expand on, and we are ready to ensure that Iran does not have nuclear weapons. He also addressed the regime's treatment of its people, saying that the Iranian regime is spending billions of dollars on nuclear project instead of providing food, electricity, and better health care and water to its citizens. Here is Caroline Glick's article. Let me show you a couple. Okay, so let's just read the first paragraph. Thursday, it was reported that the IDF is planning to change its tactics in Syria and will base its operations against Iranian targets in the area on long-range standoff munitions rather than airstrikes. Why is that? This is Seth Fransman's great report in the Jerusalem Post about the fact that Russia came out and said, Israel, you know, we had an agreement with Netanyahu, who's not in power. We don't have a relationship. Vladimir Putin doesn't have a relationship with Naftali, the two-headed prime ministership, whatever they call that thing. Prime Minister 1 and Prime Minister 2, little boy Prime Minister 1 and little boy Prime Minister 2 and little boy Foreign Minister is out there telling us that anti-Semitism is just the same as a lot of other racism and kind of undermining, but this is what the Yad Vashem has even kind of gone woke on this issue. So anyway, here's Caroline. So the IDF is planning to change its tactics in Syria. Obviously, the move will downgrade Israel's operational prowess. The report of Israel's new policy of restraint following the big story of the week, Russia's announcement that it assisted the Syrians in intercepting 4 missiles shot by F-16s at targets in Syria for the first time. Russia's statement came in tandem with its announcement that it is abrogating its 2015 agreement with Israel to coordinate and deconflict Israel's military operations in Syria from Russian forces in the country. Quote from Caroline, Russia's decision is a major strategic blow. This is a big deal. And part of the big deal, as Seth and Caroline have now reported, is that Putin and Biden had a meeting, and Biden and the Biden administration essentially said, you know, and Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid went along with it in Israel. We have a no surprises agreement. You'll tell us everything before we do them. Now look, this was kind of what was going on in the Obama administration with Netanyahu back in the first and second Obama administrations. Israel would tell the U.S. what it's going to do, and guess what the Obama administration did? They leaked it to the press. which undermined the operation. Sometimes things had to be called off. So now Israel's going back, and so Netanyahu, by the way, he didn't go along with this. He finally had it. So what did he do? He did things like he came to Congress during Obama's second administration and spoke directly to the people in Congress. And Caroline in her program this week said, and I agree, that elevated the status of Israel in the world to a major power status. Now in just a month or so, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, baby prime minister 1 and baby prime minister 2 and the foreign baby prime minister whatever, these guys are running around and they've completely undermined that. This has a strategic consequence to it. Putin is a smart guy. He is going to take care of it and going to do what he wants. So, and here's an article from Breaking Defense. Israel shifts to standoff weapons. And the result of this is the Iranians have said, listen, we're going to change the way we're operating. We're going to do tit for tat for Israel. And so you saw this ship, owned by an Israeli guy, the Mercer something, was attacked. A couple people killed in retaliation for an Israeli airstrike that killed a couple people in northern Syria. This is the new reality. That, as Seth Fransman writes in today's Jerusalem Post, that attack showcases Iran's new policy of retaliation and the fact that they were able to use a drone that has a 1,600 kilometer range. That's about 1,000 miles. And I've lost my, there it is. Lost my cursor there for a minute. Also, Sky News released this. This was leaked to them. Iran's secret cyber files saying they're going to attack installations, cyber warfare. They did some screenshots of this. China and Russia are viewed by the UK as the most potent hostile cyber threats, followed by Iran and North Korea. I remember one president called 3 of those the axis of evil. And what happened? He was mocked. Although I don't know if it counts if you get mocked by Morning Joe, but that's... So look at this. This is Lindsey Graham.
And number one, the Iranians are playing President Biden like a fiddle. The Ayatollah, Sean, is a religious Nazi. Hitler wanted a master race. The Ayatollah wants a master religion. They're trying to drive us out of Syria and Iraq so they can dominate Syria, Iraq, and Iran, the Shia Crescent. They're trying to build a nuclear weapon to hold the world hostage and one day destroy the state of Israel. They're on the path to accomplish all of that unless we make a correction now. I've never been more worried than I am right now about a war between Iran and Israel.
That was Lindsey Graham on July 2nd. He repeated that in the last week and a half. INSS, the think tank, has a new strategic assessment that came out associated with Tel Aviv University, strategic challenges facing Israel and policy recommendations for the new, for Herzog, the new president of Israel. And look at this, it has a survey. It says, what worries you the most? Internal threats to Israeli society, 21%. External threats, 5%. I'm not worried by any of these, 5%. 27% clashes between Jews and Israeli Arabs. Well, 42% say, I'm worried by all of them equally. They must be watching the update. So they have recommendations about Iran and what can be done. I will talk about this if I have time to do a midweek this week. If not, we'll do it next Sunday because I have some things I have to do this week. But they need to prepare for the following scenarios in close collaboration with the United States. You think that's going to happen? Do you think the Biden administration, hey, Israel, what can we help you do? Okay, but so here's the fantasy. In the event of return to the deal, the JCPO, strive for substantive influence on a bit longer and stronger follow-up deal, retaining Israel's freedom of action. Well, that's already not happening. So in other words, we're going to change everything that Bennett and Lapid have been doing. That'll work. Well, there was somebody in power that did that. In tandem, ensure a credible Israeli military option against Iran and prepare for the scenarios of not reaching an agreement, reaching a near threshold situation, and even a nuclear breakout. That one's more likely. But now Russia's kind of removed that option. Also have problems in Lebanon and recommendations about Lebanon. Lebanon is in major crisis. This week, there will be a Zoom conference put on by the Begin Sadat Center, the Menachem Begin Heritage Center, and Jonathan Spire, who's one of the best analysts on Middle East politics, the chaos in the north. That will be on April the 3rd. The URL is there. Just go to Begin Center. .smartticket.co.il/e. Well, I'm not going to read the whole thing for you because then make sure you get those letters all right. You can copy them. If you want to email me or messenger, I'll try to get you the link. But that'll be on Wednesday at 20:30, which would be Wednesday afternoon here in the States. So you might want to watch that. I think that would help you. We had this operational problem with Iran. And remember, this is a year ago. This is what happened in Beirut. Do you remember this? The fire and the explosion, one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in the history of mankind. This destruction, these are recent photos. They haven't really fixed a lot. The silos there, they're still standing, by the way. They move 2 millimeters a day. To give you sort of a point of reference, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, it moves 5 millimeters a year. These are moving 2 millimeters a day. They have to be torn down. By the way, the destruction would have been much, much worse if those things were not there, because it blocked the explosion from hitting West Beirut. The destruction would have been even worse. It was hundreds of people killed, a major, major problem. Lebanon is in major crisis. Gas lines mile long. They're running out of water. They have little power. Here's a picture of the towers as they stand today. They've done a survey. The FBI did a report. It was leaked this week. It was issued back in October. And it said that what exploded there was about 550 tons of ammonium nitrate. But the ship that was brought to port, they unloaded 2,700 tons. So only 20% of what was there, it either didn't explode or that stuff has been gone elsewhere. It is a major problem. And in fact, there was a report, here's a patient deaths due to shortage. There are crypto miners, they need power to run their computers to do these calculations for cryptocurrency. They can't do this, it's costing them a lot of money. Hezbollah is a problem. They may take power in here. And this is kind of interesting. So this ship was commandeered and brought to the port in Beirut in 2013. In 2015, MI6, the British Secret Service Agency or whatever it is, they took down cells in London of Hezbollah terrorists that were planning attacks. However, that was never reported. This is a screenshot of the page from the Daily Telegraph, June 10th, 2019. So for 4 years, the UK did not tell anybody about what they had done to take down these Hezbollah cells in London. Now, why was that? What was going on in 2015 that might have caused the UK and its partners, the United States, to not talk about this? 2015 was when they were finishing up the negotiations on the JCPOA. What's the most important thing in the world of the Biden administration? Oh, anyway, look, we'll talk what we can about in a midweek update, because there's 50 more slides here. Now I'm going to forget what I talked about. Look, it's a very interesting time. There are things going on with the Temple Mount. I'll try to talk about this in my next update, whether it's midweek or next Sunday. We'll talk about the Temple Mount. A lot of stuff going on there. Jews are actually going up there and praying. So listen, exciting times. Secular people are getting it. And there's a lot of church guys doing this now. Praise the Lord for that. But a lot of the church is just like, end times, too controversial. Wake up, people. Challenging times, but God is in control. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. We pray that you will give us the courage to stand for truth, to stand firm in the faith, and as Paul admonished all of us, act like men. Share the gospel. Give us opportunities to do that. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.